Sì. Ok. Può essere un'idea carina, sì. Va bene, perfetto. Sì.
Oye, que no había visto yo este libro, que bien, enhorabuena. Guay. Creo que es esto.
Comenzamos ahora, ¿no?
Ya estamos en
Okay.
So, good morning, everyone, fellow Martians. So, this is the last day, the last session, and this session is devoted to the future. Not science fiction anymore, but actually real science. Yeah, I'm not going to say the bad word. So we're thinking about how to explore Mars, but now we're thinking about how to colonize Mars in a good sense, of course. And one of the things that our future astronauts will need on the surface of Mars is to eat something, right? So I think telepizza will take too long to arrive to Mars. So we start to think about how to grow crops on Mars. So let me introduce you Margarita from UPM, from agronomy engineering.
Agricultural engineering.
Agricultural engineering, sorry about that. I was making a little translation from Spanish. She's going to show the current work that we are performing on this aspect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, José Luis, for your kind introduction, and thank you for having me today. And it's my pleasure to talk to you about a topic I'm guessing you are not so familiar with. And I'm going to start my presentation with an introduction, trying to expose the research question. We are trying to address the main challenges we are facing and the key decisions we have to make in order to start this wonderful challenge of designing the needs of a colony in Mars. For this purpose, as most of you, I'm assuming that you don't have any agricultural background, I'm going to go through main agricultural concepts that are needed to understand what we are trying to do with this study. And I will show you the main approaches, mostly based off crop modeling, and also a key aspect for us is the management of the huge uncertainty we have in this research line, and how cloud computation can contribute to the progress of our research. And I will finish showing our tiny progress and the kind of experimental setup for our modeling exercises. And I will conclude with some bullet points. So our research question is if to answer to the to know if it is possible, it would be possible to cultivate on Mars to achieve nutritional sufficiency of a colony, and in this case, which is the more efficient option to do so, and what kind of science and methodology we can use to support this endeavor. So we need to identify the optimal conditions for future food production in the surface or in Mars during the colonization stage, and try to evaluate the efficiency of this crop production process, and especially if we are going to achieve something similar to self-sufficiency. So there are many challenges, of course, for this purpose, but probably most of the most important one is the many things that we don't know about Mars. There are few observational data, but especially they are not very accurate, and we are not sure that they are representative of the whole planet, of the different conditions that we can face. For instance, for agriculture, it's very important to know the soil features, and we only have data of the few first centimeters. Of course, there are many effects that are difficult to simulate, like gravity, and we will have a very interesting talk after this one for that. So I'm very excited of being here and listen to you guys. And but there are also a lot of other perturbations of the environment that are much easier to simulate or to experiment with. I'm talking about different light quality and radiation and temperature, the wind, the dust. There are these kind of things, the CO2, or the different atmosphere are easier to simulate. Anyway, we need also to establish what critical mass we need to start to trigger the system, a sustainable system, and optimizing all these different aspects. But the main problem is that the experimentation we can perform here on Earth is very difficult and expensive, of course, and we are limited by the tools we are our disposal, because are, as you may imagine, designed for conditions on Earth. And also when we start to think about what we can do to implement a cropping system in Mars, the first thing is that you start to making decisions from the very beginning. For a start, the current approach is quite obvious, is the greenhouses. But even with that, you have to decide if you want to put your greenhouse on the surface or on the underground. And then you have to select the crop you are going to grow. There are an obvious choice that we are going to discuss in depth, that is our cereals, but there are other crops that are also very good options. And then you have to start thinking if your environmental conditions that you want to impose within the greenhouse are those that are optimal for your crop, or as close as Mars as possible, and that are compatible with the survival of your crop. That is a very entirely different story, and we also are going to go into this. For soil management, we don't know exactly how the Martian soil is, but we have some features and some description of the Martian regolith. But probably we need to mix this with some with some components imported from Earth, and also we need to evaluate, to assess if our crop is going to be a valuable energy and oxygen source for the colony, or is just going to provide food, or how much energy is going to be extracted and input in the system. So these decisions will depend on the colony and the farm size. So we will use the concept of carrying capacity. So let's start with the first choice, that is the crop selection. In principle, we know that even if this guy in this novel and funny movie you saw is using potatoes because it was the lefts he had in the ship, cereals actually, not potatoes, are the base of human nutrition. And by the way, this guy was a botanist, but the job he did in the book and the movie was completely the one agronomists do. So cereals, the base of human nutrition. Actually, 4 crops account for half of the global primary crop production, and 3 of them are cereals: maize, wheat, and rice. And if you can see here in this graph that these 2 colors account for more than half of the global world production, and is cereals and sugarcane. So within worldwide, actually 11 crops are supplying more than 75% of the energy, not just energy, but also protein. That you will discover that crops are very efficient in supplying people with protein of the diet of the humanity. But from these 11 crops, only wheat, rice, corn, and barley are providing us with 60% of the energy and protein. So why they are so effective in providing these needs? Well, they are very productive but also efficient, because nearly half of the biomass that these crops produce is the yield, the agricultural yield, the grain, and this is not a common ratio for other crops, that maybe only 30% or 25%. Only for forage crops you can harvest everything, but for grain crops or crops that we take advantage of the seeds of the fruits, half of the biomass is very high. But this biomass, these grains, are already very easy to digest and very high nutritional value, so they are very efficient in terms of nutrition. They are very well-known crops, very stable, so the cultivation risks are low and very adapted to very different environmental conditions, because we have cereals for warm, hot areas, but also cooler areas. And the grain are very easy to store, preserve and transform. We can do things with that, other type of foods very easily, and things that are not food even. So there are very useful crops, and even if they have been accused of causing very low diversity in the ecosystems, it's true that this is true because they are a very dominant crop that are very competitive against other crops. So, but for this purpose, this is not a problem, because we are not paying attention now to ecological sustainability at this point. On Earth, we know now that we should avoid a monoculture. We should use cereals in a rotation, that is the sequence of crops. But for this kind of colonization, we can start with cereals or a short rotation with other crops. And the cereals present a high intraspecific variability. That means that we have a lot of varieties to choose. And we know there are very widely studies, so we know a lot about how they work. We have a lot of, it's easier, there are a lot of investment on breeding, so we can obtain adapted varieties for different conditions much more easily than for other crops. So that's why cereals are very, very good option to start with. So also, agronomists, we measure the efficiency of a crop by different indicators, and one of them is radiation use efficiency. That is the relationship between dry matter production at harvest and the solar radiation that is intercepted during the whole growing season. And you can see here the equation is very simple, because we have the incoming radiation, that only a fraction of it is intercepted by the crop canopy, and then you can multiply it by the mass, the biomass produced per megajoules of energy, and then you have this unit factor. And then when you multiply this for the harvest index, that is this proportion of the biomass that is devoted to agricultural yield, you come up with yield. So this radiation use efficiency is basically the slope of this of the linear part of this plot, when you can see the photosynthesis and the biomass produced as a function of the radiation. And what you can see here is that cereals have a much higher radiation use efficiency than other crops, that for instance potato or legumes or other kind of crops. So that's other reason that supports the choice of cereals. But also, if you are going to use cereals, you have to know that the biomass produced is depending on the latitude and also the crop durations, and that for different cereals with different photosynthetic metabolism, the response to this factor is different. So when you design this a greenhouse and you impose some temperature or some photoperiod radiation and temperature regime, you have to take into account these aspects. So it's and there is information about this more available for cereals than for other crops. But other crops are also important, especially if you want to diversify diets and so on, and especially legumes are a source of nitrogen, because legumes have the ability of fixing atmospheric nitrogen because they have this symbiosis with and fixing rhizobia bacteria in their roots. But the problem is that these, well, the advantage is they are a very good protein source, because beans are very rich in protein. So it's a way, it's a natural way of producing nitrogen and protein for humans. But the problem is that this comes with a price, because these bacteria are consuming energy from the plant. So in result, the biomass produced, the final biomass produced, is more or less half of the cereals. So this is something that we have to take into account, maybe to combine with cereals, but always cereals is going to be the basis of the nutrition. Potato is also an interesting crop, because it produces a lot of biomass, huge volume of biomass, but with a lot of water content and a lot of volume too. So the storage is not so easy, and also there are, here you can see that it's the potential losses of the biomass is very high, in contrast with cereals anyway. For a second stage or for a later stage of colonization, you can start thinking about small animals like poultry, because with animals we are able to transform the cellulose that we cannot eat directly. That's the function of animals in a cropping system. They are digesting the cellulose, that the mass, the vegetal production that we cannot digest directly. Also, algae are an option, but the amount of water for a start is limiting, right? So let's go with this concept. We need to start our calculations. That is the carrying capacity of an agricultural system. That is the number of people that can be fed with the primary production of a given area of land. And this is going to depend on the potential of your environment, and you are going to set an intensity of cultivation. So we have a lot of water and nitrogen. Probably the plant density I'm going to impose is going to be higher. And the calculations are based on the first law of the thermodynamic, and we are going to make the computation not only for energy but also for proteins. So just for you to know, even the diet, the needs, the energy required per human is something that is subject to a high uncertainty, because it's very different if you come from United States, that if you come from Asia, and I'm only looking at developed countries, not for those that don't eat enough. Okay, so here we have to be conservative and put a high requirements per person, but this could be an expression for the carrying capacity, in which the P is the net production, the biomass produced by our crop, and the EV would be the energy produced, the heat by heat combustion produced per kilogram of this biomass, and then you have to subtract the part that is lost in the harvest and the fraction of the biomass that you cannot digest. And if you divide this by the yearly or daily, depending on how you make the calculation, requirements or proteins or energy per person a day or per year, you have the carrying capacity of your biomass. So with this, we can calculate the different efficiency of trophic chains, and we are going to compare the two crops, for instance, a forage and a wheat, with similar biomass, but with very different harvest index, because it's close to 1 because it's forage, so everything is going to be consumed, or nearly everything, 40% for a wheat. So this is the agricultural yield we have, and here are, with the formula you just have saw, the number of people that can be fed with this agricultural biomass or production in terms of milk, when this animal, once it's converted to milk, because we are talking about humans, not cows or something, and wheat. So you can see that when we eat directly vegetal production, we can feed close to double in terms of energy, and that also maybe you are surprised to see that that cereals are very efficient in providing proteins as well. Not only, but because we don't think in wheat like an energy provider, right? Protein provider. We also think that it's carbs, so it's energy. So if this is is the case where the whole world is not eating only vegetables. Well, there are a lot of reasons. There is now a very hot debate about that, but there are a lot of reasons to keep animal production in place. Even if part of the world needs to reduce the consumption, reducing is not the same that removing. And we need animal production for diet diversification. There are things that are easier to get, nutrients are easier to get from animals, but also to protect, to have a diversification of production that help us to mitigate agricultural risks. And not depending, for instance, in Africa, many small farmers rely on small animals for facing very dry years and very bad agricultural years. And also, and this is key, animals allow us to extract agricultural production for many areas that are not suitable for crops, because this digestion of this not eatable mass directly for animals. So, for instance, grasslands that are not suitable for cultivating other crops are possible for animal production, and this way we can extract some yield. So, what kind of inputs would our crops need? Well, actually, we have to think. Here you can see number of kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, because nitrogen is the main nutrient of crops. You have also phosphorus and potassium as main macronutrients, and you have a long list of micronutrients in the way that humans need to, and in a similar way. But also it's water and CO2 as the main substratum of the photosynthesis, and actually in the climate change this is the only positive part for plants. The photosynthetic rate is increased by climate change, but in spite of many other negative effects. And also we have to rely on some amount on fertile soil. And when I say fertile, we are going to need some life, some microorganisms in the soil. Anyway, we should, we are going to start from scratch. We should, from the beginning, to design it in a circular economy approach. So when we think about optimizing a control environment as a greenhouse, we need to decide if we are going to maintain optimal conditions for plants that would probably require more investment in energy and in initial mass coming from earth or synthesized there, or to minimize inputs to save energy and mass and start with conditions that are compatible with maintaining the crop alive, but not so different, as much closer as possible to Mars conditions, to promote also the adaptation of our crops to Martian conditions. Or maybe we can start with a strategy and slowly transitioning from one to another, or try different combinations. So to find what solution is the optimum, for instance, between 18 degrees for the crop maize would be the minimum to the optimum, or for 20 that would be the minimum radiation to the optimum for a crop of full water nitrogen supply, we have a wide range, and modeling is going to help us to test the balance, the energy balance we obtain with every stream and everything in between. So knowing that we have a huge range of temperature in Mars, that we have water but it's difficult to extract, that we have radiation but with weeks that the radiation is going to be very low, and the radiation quality is going to change through these storms, and this would have an effect on crop morphogenesis, because the number of organs, the shape of the organs is going to be different, because we know that radiation quality changes that. We don't have magnetic field to protect the crops against space radiation and preserve the DNA of our crops. So we know that we need some CO2 for start with. we can provide this CO2, and we can also take advantage of the oxygen produced by the plant. But we have to decide how much we want to produce and how much we want to extract from the atmosphere, the light atmosphere there. And we have to decide the physical design of the greenhouse according to the height of our crop height. How much is going to be our soil depth, and this is going to be important. How many microelements we need to import or to produce, or what kind and number and density of microorganisms we have to cultivate there, etc. The good news is that for the moment we won't have pests and diseases that are a huge problem on Earth. And for that reason, it's possible, starting with a very simple rotation or no rotation at all, and machinery is not going to be a problem. I would like to discuss what is going to happen with gravity. There's still some gravity, but also we have the phototropism effect that is going to make the plants grow towards the sun anyway. So in this, maybe you start to see how modeling can help. Crop models are software containing equations from crop ecophysiology, as the one I showed you, that describe the interaction of the crop with the environment, and all this environment, the soil, the genetic of the crop, and even the farmer management can be described numerically by variables and parameters. And we are going to run a model that runs in a daily basis, but the estimations of yield, biomass, water consumption, the crop phenology, that is the flowering, maturity dates, their gases production, the energy and masses produced, is done in a yearly basis. So you are going to, in summary, an estimation of the harvest. And in our methodology, we are going to adapt what we have been doing in the last 2 decades on the in the field of climate change impact adaptation assessment. So we are going to consider that Mars are an extreme climate change or environmental change, and try to take advantage of these years that we have been using this methodology. So we are going to test how crops behave under a wide range of environmental conditions. So once we have set our approach, it's time to stop and think. What kind of model do we need? Do we require a very complex model? What level of accuracy is needed to start with? And how to deal with the huge uncertainty we have about the observed conditions? So just a very short, just to make the presentation a bit lighter, also a bit thought about complexity. A more complex model is maybe better, but not always more efficient. In this, these are simpler, very simple models, but everyone knows, can understand the message. While this one is very complex, probably better, but we have been discussing the meaning of this expression for 4 centuries. So efficient models just should focus on the key control points of the system, and this is an efficient model that is designed for your purpose. In the same way, how can I say that a model that has a very low accuracy is useful? Is low accuracy synonym of useless? Actually, even this very, very wrong model was useful when people get lost and they went very far away. This model imposed fear, so people didn't get lost. And this kind of, at the extent that the knowledge started to progress, this model became more complex and more accurate. But even this, that with the technology we know that are more correct, are still wrong. They are not always, will be never exact and perfect, but still useful. And now that we have more knowledge and that models can be supported by computer science, we are more capable of computing many scenarios. Anyway, what I want to say is that even if our model is far from being right or far from being able to simulate maritime conditions, it's a start and can be useful and can be used in many useful ways. So the model we will be using is the DSAT model, that is a medium-level complexity model, because main processes I'm talking about biomass production, phenology, water stress, nitrogen nutrition are simulated accurately, but some of them are simplified. It's very widely used and well maintained, and there are many researchers working on them, on it. So it's progressing, it's an evolving model, and the key point is that each individual simulation is quite fast. It's based that you can have the ability of running a lot of simulations with it, and as the code, the source code is available, you have the possibility to add modules, because it has a modular structure, to incorporate, for instance, gravity effects or light quality effects. So there is it's an open tool that can be used for further research. So what kind of data we have for modeling on Mars? Well, for climate we have weather records, and probably with weather generators a more consistent or longer, at least, time series of climate weather can be generated. But we have to examine this, because these weather generators are going to be calibrated for Earth conditions. So we have a problem, but we have to start somewhere, as I said, either with wrong models. And then for soils we have some samples that we have the problem of representativeness, but at least we have real samples that with the help of these colleagues from Institute of Geochemistry in Russia, they have built a simulant of based on a real sample of Mars soils from emission. And we have here the texture and many of the features we need to run the simulations in the crop model. So they also have proven that in terms of agricultural viability, this model is valid for crop cultivation, because they germinated seeds. And we have this used this described as input in our crop model. So then we come the second part of the crop modeling. That's what the main approach. And then, if you remember my outline, I wanted to talk to you about uncertainty. Well, again, here we have to take advantage of our experience in climate, that is in climate change, and how we deal with uncertainty there. Well, where do uncertainty come from? Well, uncertainty comes from observations that are far from being accurate for Martian conditions, and also for our models and our knowledge, and even for our computation capacity. So in climate change science, we use ensemble of models to compensate errors of individual models, or we use experimental setups of simulations based on massive perturbed conditions. So this is the approach we are going to use here, because when you don't know what future you have to face, it's better that you prepare for the widest range of possible future. So instead of trying to choose what possible future and I'm going to replace the word future by Martian conditions, we are going to try to design a system that can cope with a wide range of different conditions in Mars. And for that, we are using the approach of impact and adaptation response surfaces. And this is what we do for climate change, and that we think that we can use for this research line. Here, for instance, we are just simulating how the crop yield is going to respond to combined perturbation of temperature and precipitation, combined changes of temperature, precipitation, and then we build the isolines and can see this is like a systematic sensitivity analysis of crop yield to joint changes of temperature and precipitation. And every square in this large graph is a different management option. And each dot within each square is a different future, a different combination of change, of combined change of temperature precipitation. So for Martian conditions, what we could do is to keep this scheme, but for instance, probably we think that instead of precipitation and temperature, it would be radiation and temperature. And define in this way different, so every dot in the square would be a different control environment within the greenhouse, and every square would represent a different management of the greenhouse. For instance, a different water and nitrogen regime, a different variety, a different soil intensity, etc. So this is how we manage this uncertainty, and for instance, in this specific plot, you can see the green dot are those options that work for every combination. So the green is the options that are more valid. So there are some options that only work under certain circumstances, but there are others that always work. And this is the way we handle this huge uncertainty and look for options that can work for a wide variety of unknown conditions. So that's why we need to do so many simulations, because maybe there are 500,000 of simulations behind this plot that you have just saw. And for this kind of massive simulation exercises, we have these simulation inputs that are in terms of climate. We need radiation, temperature, and precipitation, maximum and minimum temperature. And we have humidity and wind speed, it's okay, it's better. And then we need some features from the soil, the depth, the texture, these three: field capacity, wilting, and saturation, under description of how much water the soil can contain and how much is retained and available for the plant. And then you have also the organic matter with a description of how the phenology and the potential, the productive potential of your variety and the management in terms of nutrition, in terms of water. You can calculate by means of the model the energy, the biomass, the yield, the water consumption, and the gases. For us, in this particular case, in Earth, is not so important, but in this particular research, gases emission is going to be crucial. How much oxygen we are going to produce for the colony, it's not just food. So these are our crop simulation outputs. So if we start thinking how many experimental combinations I want to try in my model, I can't just think about a large list of treatment factors. That is, you make research, you will know that treatment factors, if you have a long list, is going to be your experiment very, very huge, very easily. So we can try between 1 and 5 crops, between 2 and 6 variety per crop, maybe 2 soil types, or 1 to 3 soil depths, and different combinations of microorganisms, radiation types, different water management, different temperature regimes, fertilization, so on. So if we stick with the minimum value of this range, we are going to obtain 32 combinations, 32 scenarios to try. But if we go with the higher range, more than 3 million. And that's why we need something that supports us in our modeling exercises. And for each, and not only for calculation, but for the running, but also to analyzing the results, because for these 3 millions, we are going to have data on that, on yield, on other, and then we are going to be able to derive how many calories and proteins we are going to produce. So for a very simple calculation for a colony of 100 people, just for trying and considering that we need heaters to keep the the temperature in the greenhouse and ventilators, and we have to impose some radiation regime, and we need water for the crops and also for the 100 people, and oxygen, and we have different systems to produce it before, in addition to the crop. Better, probably you all know much better than me. Let's try to make some simple calculation for a cropping system based on maize, potatoes, and peas. Considering that is a reasonable yield of per crop, 50 this kind of tons per potato, for maize less than 20, and considering the composition of these crops, the crop yield in protein, carbs, and fat, and the heat conduction, we can calculate the surface, because here in calories per hectare is the surface. So if you extract this surface for 10 people, because it would be their carrying capacity, but what I'm just providing the answer to the carrying capacity, and I just looking for the hectares, we would need a greenhouse of 2.5 hectares. But considering corridors and other space and losses, 3 hectares. So we can put half of it to cereals. I already justify white, and the others for diversification and proteins. But maize would be my main crop. So for this kind of combination, this is the cycle duration, the annual water requirements, and the number of irrigation. And this is the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium we need. And P, we don't need any nitrogen unless only if we inoculate Rhizobia bacteria. But we are counting on that. Okay? So we need to take into account that we need to synthesize or import this kind of biomass before starting. So this is just an example for this kind of colony. So what scenarios are possible for achieving this kind of production and this kind of setup? Well, we are going to perturbate the parameters of the simulation inputs. We are going to maybe not going through to the minimum scenario I showed you, the 32 combinations, but close to it. Just perturbing weather, soil, genetics, and management, 3 temperatures, 3 photoperiods, 3 soil types, 3 varieties, 3 nutrition levels, and 3 irrigation regimes. That gives more than 300 scenarios, and then we have to consider that we have 3 crops and every merchant scenarios of the weather outside as we want. It's just for one. So you can see how massive our simulation exercise can become very, very easily. And our computation capacity, at least in the agricultural school of engineering, is limited. So computers that are our main tool is not a good solution, and that's why the team of Jose Luis is supporting us, because we need very expensive equipment. So serverless computing is allowing us in this collaboration to execute data-intensive tasks almost in real time, low cost. So now these kind of things are becoming, that were very limiting for us, are becoming possible with cloud computation. And here, well, this part probably you know much better than me. We are just we have started to make the simulations with this kind of inputs of weather and the simulant of the Martian soil, and also the source code of the SAT was compiled for an Amazon Linux virtual machine architecture. This part of, if you make me any questions, is him. He's going to answer. You can ask me everything about crops, but we have been looking for a collaboration because we need some experts on that. So we have this Amazon S3 input bucket that launches our simulation, providing file structure required by the model, and we have this Amazon Lambda wrapper function in Python that is triggered, configuring each simulation, and it's by the means of this process that we get this simulation done. and making the results available in Amazon S3 output bucket. So we are trying to develop an energy balance model for trying to compute with every single scenario you have saw the required energy for each one of them and compare it with the energy required for the control environment of the greenhouse to simulate crop yield. So the control conditions to be tested are going to be simulated in hierarchical order. First, we are going to perturb the radiation and temperature, fixing the water amount, the nitrogen and other nutrients, the soil depth, and the crop variety. Anyway, the number of simulations are becoming very, very high, and the proposed architecture has already demonstrated that we have reduced considerably our execution time with a very, very low cost. So this is definitely the approach we are going to follow. And just to conclude my talk, tell you that uncertainty management is very important in our crop and our study, and serverless computing is helping us for conducting so massive simulation that we need. And that's all I want to show you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Margarita. So I will start with a question that Jose Maria Ortega from the YouTube streaming was asking. Actually, what he was asking is why is not considered so important the aspect of nitrogen?
Why it's not so important?
Yeah, why it's not?
Actually, it is.
Ah, okay.
It is important, but we can just start with a supply, full nitrogen supply. But this nitrogen supply is something that we can control directly. It's part of the management, the crop management. While what we cannot control is the weather outside and the gradient. For instance, it's not the same to impose 20 degrees or 25 degrees in a greenhouse when outside is 20, but when outside is minus 80, for instance. The energy gradient is very, very different. So we are not so worried about nitrogen because we know how much nitrogen the crop needs. But we don't know how many energy we are going to require to keep the crop in perfect conditions.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, more questions? Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was a bit, you didn't tell me. I was late.
Salvador.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Very, very interesting indeed. Just a question from somebody that doesn't know anything about growing plants. First one is about pollination. Do you need external pollination? Can you ensure that? And the second one is nitrogen. How to supply nitrogen? Because on Earth we have a lot of nitrogen on the atmosphere, but I think this cannot be directly absorbed by the plants. It needs to be on the soil in the form of nitrato de Chile and things like that. So
yeah, well, for the first one was?
Pollination.
Pollination, yes. For instance, maize is another advantage of corn is that there is a masculine flower on the top and a feminine flower in the middle of the plant, and is self-pollinated. But for other crops, we can act as pollinators because it's not so big. I mean, 3 greenhouses for 100 people. These 100 people can devote a week to act as bees if they need. I've done it when we want to make cross pollination with different treatments in plants. We do manually pollination. So for sure, in future you will have to introduce natural pollinators, but you can do it by hand if needed. And the other question was?
Nitrogen.
Yes. Well, there are some, as far as I have read, there are, well, with this kind of system that there is this kind of system can produce pretty much everything, but is still in development. But there are two options. You have to import it from Earth, and then you need to produce it from the light from the atmosphere. Plants can do it. Legumes, pea, can fix nitrogen, and this nitrogen is not going to be consumed by the peas, but it's going to remain for the next crop. That's what we do actually on Earth. So there are ways that you slowly can enrich your soil with nitrogen.
Thank you very much.
And also, the humans are going to produce nitrogen in the urea. It's a very easy way to put on the soil, of course.
And besides, who doesn't want arepas? We have to start with maize.
Yeah, I have actually a couple of questions. The first one, how crops could face the eventually presence of chlorine in the soil, because we have observed it on Mars. And the second is, about animal proteins. Have been thought about use of insects?
Okay, well, yes, about the toxic element in the soils, that's one of the main reasons we cannot easily to say just put in a greenhouse and use the soil. We have to make some mixtures between some soils taken or brought from Earth, and probably we are going to develop varieties that are more and more resistant to the toxic elements we have there. But this is going to be a process. And for insects, yes, that could be a very good protein source, and especially if we use the same insects that can be, for instance, pollinators. But it's not the first thing I would do. No. But yes, for sure, it's going to be one of the possibilities. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah, a question and comment as to this toxicity. Perhaps we can just remove the uppermost layer of the surface away. That might be that toxicity isn't so strong anymore when we go deeper, because that's very likely due to the ultraviolet radiation for billions of years that is causing us part of that, at least. I mean, toxicity.
I cannot hear you. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So that you just when we remove the uppermost layer, perhaps we find better soil, not that toxic, very likely. And also as to the water, so that's there's water around, so in the ground. So mixed with the regolith, mixed with the soil, so that can be used of. So then I understood that you were planning to have a circular kind of system, and then the water would be sufficient. So that is very likely, likely. But also, as Enrico mentioned about these insects, that's I think something perhaps you might want to look at, and then also that way, because you need a closure to protect against dust storms. There needs to be some whatever kind of vegetation we have, there needs to be a closure. So then I'm sure you are aware of this vertical cultivation kind of system. So yeah. Perhaps that's then within the same enclosure we can grow more. But my question is actually, you had so many of these possible cases that you would like to explore and optimize, and you were talking about making simulation and so forth. Have you thought of that out of those cases, or out of those out of the reasons, out of the factors that are behind the cases, there are some that are crucial, and then many of that you wrote down are sort of like much less crucial. So have you thought of making these simulations perhaps by firstly reducing the factors just for the crucial ones and thereafter continuing?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question. Actually, well, the first part of your comment, just made me think that I have to add many things in my in my scenarios to simulate. And there are all, of course, very good ideas that for sure I would love to try and to simulate. And for the last part, actually, this is I think it's maybe here, that for a start, we start like making a wish list of the things we want to try. But at the end, I think I have show a slide when we say hierarchically we are going to classify what we want to try first, and this radiation and temperature. And that's why we start with that and fix everything else. But then we wonder if we want to optimize, because probably for 2 or 3 people, for a start, this is not important. But it's going to become important when population grows there. So that's why optimizing is important from the start, and trying to be sustainable and try to learn from the lessons we haven't on Earth, because we are starting fresh there. Really.
If you allow me to add something to this part, the first work we did was together with the Verdadsky Institute. Actually, what we were doing with them was actually we had some, not samples from Mars, but we have some mechanic aspects and chemical aspects that were recovered or at least analyzed on site. So what we did was a simulator of that, but in real life simulator. We cannot guess right now how the characteristics of the soil underground are. So we started with this work. We expect that at least the chemical and the mechanic aspects are the same. And to the second question, well, you're right. You have to prioritize some elements. But what we thought is that with serverless computing, we could simulate at once all possible variations. And maybe some aspects that were not considered as crucial, maybe they could be crucial, because something that, for instance, we wanted to reduce is the electricity needed by the greenhouse, for instance. So maybe if we change, I don't know, 5 degrees less of light or something like that.
Yeah, for maybe it's not so crucial for a small population, but yeah, for sustainable population there can be important.
We have time for one last question from Gianni.
You have to.
From the greenhouse structural point of view, have you thought that will you have if you put in the walls of the greenhouse water, or if you either liquid water or in the ice, you will have no problems for radiation whatsoever, even with just not a big thickness of the.
Yeah, actually we haven't. We didn't go into the design details, but only for the moment into the energy balance. Okay. So for sure they are going to come up with a lot of ideas to make it more efficient, and I just list the huge list of problems and issues that we have to resolve. Yeah. But for this preliminary stage, we are just dealing with energy balance, and it's already becoming huge. So, but sure, for sure it's going to be a very good suggestion. Thank you. And
okay. One short question.
Yeah, no, it is only, I'm impressed by the complexity of the problem, how you deal with that. But my question is the following. You are trying to apply that to Mars, but at the same time you could apply that to the Earth.
Sure.
Because now they are trying to introduce new scenarios for cultivation, concentration of, so actually this...
Actually application on Earth is what I mainly do. To climate change adaptation. That's what I do. So this has become a very exciting side research line fostered by my collaboration with José Luis. I'm very glad to do so. But it's actually based on our experience of a changing climate in Spain, on Earth. Yeah.
So you could applying a scenario of the Sahara Desert.
Well, it's completely feasible. It's just a question of money.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
and political will.
So thank you so much, Margarita.
Thank you very much. I only want to say that I think the collaboration was with the Complutense University that I forgot to mention, and also different institutions in Russia. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's Okay, so one aspect that was addressed in the previous talk was about gravity. And the other one, which is very important, you know, man cannot live off breath solely, but also of oxygen. So the next talk is going to be given by Professor Unai Lopez de Heredia from UPM, and also Mr. Sergio Martin. And I think I'm not going to spoil anything. You will find it really fascinating. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, José Luis. Thanks for inviting us to be here in front of this very specialized audience. We are a bit out of the things you do usually, and in the end we came to this because we were always on our faculty at the forestry school in Madrid, we were always talking about how a tree would grow in lack of gravity. And then I met José Luis, we collaborated in other issues related to bioinformatics and cloud computing and that stuff, and he told me that he was working with Mars and so on, and then we decided to start with this short experiment. This is our little baby. Later on, Sergio will talk to you about the specificities of this experiment. And what we are doing is just a proof of concept, or try to start working on what are the effects of growing trees under altered gravity. Okay? So Marga has done an excellent talk before me, so she explained a lot of the problems we will find in Mars. I don't think we will see trees growing on Mars. I'm sorry if I am disappointing you, but in any case, we have to try. So we will put ourselves in a scenario of a greenhouse in Mars, and what we have to know is that Mars is not the first hostile environment the plants have been into. If we see this picture of evolution of photosynthetic organisms, we have seen that in the evolutionary history of Earth, first we have in the water, we have unicellular photosynthetic organisms that evolved to produce unicellular green algae. This then evolved to produce more complex eukaryotic pluricellular algae that started doing photosynthesis, changing the atmosphere on Earth, and like about 450 millions of years before present, they jumped to the Earth, which was and it is an extreme hostile environment for a plant. Okay? After that, we have 450 million years. The plants evolved to adapt to multiple conditions they can find on Earth. So this is the first thing I want you to take into consideration, that jumping to Mars is almost like if we were in this point where plants went from the water to the Earth. Okay? Okay, once on Earth, the plants need to adapt to obtain this input they require to do their metabolic processes. So they need CO2, they need water, of course, they need light, and they need nutrients. So in this race to optimize the use of these inputs they require for the metabolic processes, they adapted, incorporating several adaptations like height growth and optimization for the competition for light. They developed some organs, they developed some roots to fix, to anchor to the substrate, to the soil. They developed leaves to optimize the photosynthetic uptake, the photosynthetic metabolic process. And when they started to put their leaves up in the close to the sun, they had to start growing in height, develop stems, and they had to develop some what we call vascular tissues. These are cells that are specialized in the transport of water and nutrients from the roots to the leaves. Okay? This also, in a more advanced stage of evolution, required some tissues, some cells specialized in the mechanical support of the plant. So here you can see a tree, and we need very specialized tissues that are able to support the weight of a complex organism such as a tree. Okay? They also incorporated some adaptations related to an isolation from a dry environment. Okay? So most of the cells that are covering a plant are covered with lipids that are hydrophobic, so they reduce water losses, and they also prevent the attack of pathogens, okay, like fungi or insects or whatever. And then they also modify the reproductive system. Before we've been talking about pollination, but plants have also some other strategies rather than producing flowers or pollinate to produce fruits. They can be propagated vegetatively, okay, without the need of pollination, without flowers. In fact, some of the plants don't produce flowers, okay? Only a group of plants are flower producers and fruit producers. So there is plenty of modifications of the reproductive system that occur during the adaptation to land. But remember that this happened in a very large period of time. So what we are trying to do is to accelerate the process of adaptation of plants to a very harsh environment such as the one we can find in Mars. plants, as you can see here, are able to inhabit very diverse terrestrial ecosystems and have developed multiple adaptations to water availability, optimize the water availability. They can live in a very large range of temperatures. They are adapted also to the photoperiod. We have many diverse, a huge diversification of plants, so they can live almost in any substrate, even in toxic substrates. One of the leading fields of research is detoxification of soils using plants. This is very interesting if we are thinking in Mars. Okay, and the most interesting thing is that these adaptations have been produced in dynamic changes of these factors. Okay, so we have not only in large periods of time changes in these factors that have promote evolution, but also within a year the plants are able to withstand very diverse conditions. They can be under extreme heat, but in the same year they can also suffer from frost. So they are very hard and very resilient, which is another word we are using lately very much. Okay. So in this context, the only factor that has remained constant throughout the evolutionary history of plants is gravity. So when we work on Earth, we don't have to worry about gravity. Well, we could worry about it. I will show you later why. But if we are thinking about going out the Earth, we have to take into consideration that gravity magnitude will change. The acceleration of gravity on Earth is 9.8 meters per square second, and in Mars we have much reduced gravity. If we think on the Moon, we will also have much reduced gravity, and if we are thinking in space flights, we will also have we could even have zero gravity, actually. The effect of gravity in plants is rather important. Here you can see a scheme of a plant, and remember that I have said before that plants have developed some vascular tissues that are required to transport water and nutrients from the soil to the leaves. Okay? So, as you can see here, this is done by special cells that are empty cells, okay? They may have this shape, okay, and they are cells that initially they are alive cells, but in one moment they die and they get empty by some interruptions of the cell walls that are used by the water to be transported merely by physical laws. Okay, there is not any investment for water transport. What's the mechanism? Okay, we will have some kind of holes called the stomata in the leaves that will open, and the water vapor will go out the leaf here. Okay, this will produce some negative pressures in the tissues that are empty in these conduits, and this will produce a difference in water potential that has to be counteracted by the water to lift the plant and reach the leaves. This is important because one of the components of the water potential is the gravity potential. Okay, so gravity is involved in this raise of water to the upper parts of the plant, especially when we have large plants like trees. This is a sequoia. As you can see, this has like dozens of meters. So gravity will have an effect on this, and in the end it will limit the size of the plant we will have. Okay? Very interestingly, the same tissue, the same cells that enable water transport are those that give support, mechanical support to the plant. And this is what we call xylem, secondary xylem in trees, and is mostly composed of these cells, and this is what we commonly know as wood. Okay? And wood I am a forester, so wood is one of our materials of work, very, very important. Okay, here you have a piece of wood, okay, secondary xylem. This is, we have three sections of a piece of wood. This is a cross section, a tangential section and a radial section. And as you can see here, we have two systems. Cells are oriented in two directions. We have one axial direction, okay, these cells are oriented this way, so these are the cells that are moving water from the roots to the leaves, and then we have some cells that are oriented radially, okay? But the most important thing is that under normal growth, what we have is a very ordered system of cells growing there, okay? As you can see, these cells are very large, well, more or less large cells, and they have thick cell walls that are lignified. Okay? They produce lignin, which is a polymer that was incorporated into evolution when the vascular plants were differentiated. Okay? And is one of the motors of the huge diversity we have in plants today. Okay, this incorporation of lignin to these cells that allowed, as I have said, the water transport and the growth of the plants. Okay, this is a scheme of how this secondary growth is produced. Okay, when we don't have a secondary growth, when we have a herb, the herbs grow from the tips of the plant. There are some like mother cells that are stored here in this tip of the stem and also in the tips of the roots. But when wood is developed in woody plant species, at one point we will have some mother cells here that produce a circumference of cells that will produce the wood inward the plant. Okay, so this will make the plant to be thicker, okay, rather than grow in height. Thinking about this secondary growth in plants we will install in a colony, in a potential colony in Mars, is important because Marga has told us about food, which is one of the things we will need if we want to put some people on Mars, but we will also need some other materials. And plants and secondary growth is responsible for a lot of renewable products and services, like wood, I have talked about that, barks like cork, for instance, which is a very Mediterranean product, is produced by this secondary growth. We could also obtain some resins, and this secondary growth is also the basis for obtaining biomass energy, even to obtain bioplastics or biofuels, and also textile fibers or viscose, for instance. We don't want to think about naked people on Mars, so we will have to be dressed, and this is one choice we can use. Okay, and also pulp and paper, and as Marga has said before, we could also use this kind of plants to change the conditions of the soil. We will obtain organic matter. This could also be substrate to grow other species, other crops. Okay, and this is to justify the interest of having trees growing in a greenhouse in Mars. Okay. How does gravity affect the growth of the plants? Well, in herbal plants, those that grow only from the tips, it is well known and is well characterized the combined effect of phototropism. The stem will grow following the source of light, as you can see here, and the roots will grow escaping from light. Okay, this is combined with gravitropism, which is another effect, or geotropism is also known as this. And here you can see this the effect of gravitropism. Roots will grow towards the soil. Here you can see an experiment. This was an experiment on the International Space Station, and you can see that there is a modification. These roots that were grown in the ground, they are larger, okay, and on the International Space Station, they produce shorter and curved roots, okay? And this is the effect of gravitropism in Populus tremula. Populus tremula is a tree that grows, they put to grow horizontally, okay, and in the time in 2 hours it recovered the vertical position, okay. So more or less the external stimuli driving plant growth, the gravity effect on plant growth is well characterized, okay. On woody plant species we also know that there is some effect on wood, okay, and it is also well characterized, what is called the reaction good, okay. This reaction good is good that is produced by the tree when, for instance, it grows on not in the vertical, okay? So there are two strategies to counteract the effect of this curvature of the soil, okay? Which is one group of species produces in the cells of the wood a few amount of lignin. So what they do is to produce this special polysaccharide layer, which is called the G layer, which is it allows to support some efforts of tension. Okay, so this is called the tension good. And in other group of species, more primitive, the gymnosperms, what we will have is an accumulation of lignified cells in one side of the plant, so it is able to withstand the effects of compression. Okay, so this is called compression good. The point is that an alteration on the vertical will produce malformation, and we know this. Okay, we know also that there are some other mechanical stimuli that may produce malformation in wood. This is how a normally grown pine, the aspect of it on a microscope if we do a cross-section, okay? As you can see here, this is the cambial zone. These are the mother cells that will produce good. This is the good, okay? As you can see, we have very ordered system of cells, the axial tracheids. And this is the phloem. This is the other tissue that is produced in the secondary growth, that is like a circular tissue around the good that will be in the inner part. Okay, so when we made some wounds, some traumatic injuries on the tree, we saw that there was a change in the polarity of the cells. Okay, these are cells that are.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption, but the project coordinator is leaving, so he wanted just to give to.
Okay, sorry, I have the taxi just outside, so and we are leaving. So actually, it has been a very good, well-organized conference workshop. We have discussed a lot of topic from science to engineering. Now also on something that is a bit interesting, but a bit outside our area. But it's really interesting to live on Mars, and it's an important asset that we need also to exploit. So I would like to remind that next year the conference that will be the final one will be in June in Alghero, Sassari, okay, in Sardinia, and will be probably one full week, okay? So, bye-bye and see you next year then.
Sorry, Unai.
No, it's okay, I understand. Okay, I was talking about the normal growth good would present here in this microscopic cross-section, and I was telling you that after making an injury on the tree on the good, we obtained distorted patterns of growth in the cells, so the polarity was lost. Okay, this is also because of inner tensions that are produced during the growth of the plant, so it's not by the effect of gravity, but the point is that if we alter gravity when growing wood, we will expect to find some type of change, maybe in the size or orientation of our cells in the wood, and also possibly in the metabolic pathways that lead to lignin deposition and cell wall formation. And this is very important from the point of view of having a good product, a usable product. Okay? So what's the purpose of our experiment? Is to develop wood under altered gravity. And how can we alter gravity? We have listened these days that this is quite difficult to do it, and we agree. Sergio will agree, possibly. And out of it, we could do that trying to grow good on the ISS, on satellites, or go to Mars and put some plants growing there. As I told before, I don't think we will see it. There are also some other ways to modify the magnitude of gravity, which are parabolic flies, but these are very short. So for good to grow, we need very long periods of time. We need months, at least months, or even years to see an effect. With months, probably it will be enough. So we cannot alter the magnitude of gravity, but what we can do is to alter the positional perception the cell has when it is differentiating in a good cell of this gravity. And we can do it here on the ground. And how we do this? We do this with clinostats. Okay, there are several types of clinostats that have been engineered since the, I think, 19th century. We had the first clinostats. This is a 1D clinostat scheme. So this is one axis, okay, and it's rotating, and the plant is put in this direction, okay? So, well, this is a way to alter the normal perception of gravity one plant would have normally growing. This is very similar, but here the plants are in this position, and the rotation makes that in some part of their life cycle they will be growing in different positions just with one axis. Okay, this was our first clinostat. This is the first thing we constructed. We haven't taken with us today, but this was our first approach to this problem. But Sergio here constructed a 3D clinostat. Okay, this clinostat is based on two axes. Okay, so we can have rotation according to these two axes, and we can modify the velocity of the motors that are transmitting movement to the axis. So with this, what we are trying to obtain is a modification of the plant positional perception, but not only in this vertical, but also in with other angles. Okay. Our clinostat was also developed and we think to produce it to grow big plants. Okay, what we have here are not that big yet, but we wanted a clinostat able to grow quite a number of plants, so we could do some with some control. Other control plants growing, we could do some statistics analysis. Okay, we needed it to be able to host big plants, at least this size. Okay. We also needed long-term continuous functioning. This is probably the most difficult thing to achieve, but we are on the good direction. And it required also to be able to support large weights, okay? Because this is a heavy structure. As you can see here, it has a substrate within the cylinder, and the plants will grow, and they will have water, because it is the other requirement we needed. We need to add some water here at some points, because otherwise the substrate will dry and the plants will die, okay? So Sergio constructed this clinostat. Later on, he will talk to you about the specificities of the mechanical construction. And with a mobility sensor, the first thing we did is to check that we were modifying the perception of the gravity of the plants in the way we wanted to. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to obtain a sphere that plants would be rotating and be in different parts of the space we have here. Okay, so we put the mobility sensor, and after a few seconds we had half a sphere. Okay, then after 1,600 seconds, we obtain a complete sphere, and then what we check is that having a long period, like 30 minutes or so, we were able to densify the sphere. So this is good, this is really good, because plants will not perceive a preferential gravity direction. Okay, we are not modifying the magnitude of the gravity, but we are modifying the perception the cell will have, and probably the metabolic signal pathways that will be triggered after this change in the gravity perception will be very similar. Okay. So to test the clinostat functioning, we have done some preliminary observations, and we had to choose one plant, one tree to do this experiment. And we choose this species here. I think you all know that this is a cypress. Okay, and why we choose this cypress? Okay, this is a gymnosperm, it's a conifer. Conifers grow quick. Okay, they are trees, but they grow relatively quick. And we could also propagate them vegetatively, which is very convenient to have clones, which is another way that we should explore if we go to Mars. We should propagate and use clones, probably genetically modified clones. We could also, I think, the protein problem you talked before, probably with genetically modified organisms, could be solved, having only plants, no need for insects. And okay, we put some seeds germinating here, and this is the aspect a plant of like 6 months, probably 3 months, 6 months will have. Okay, so the technique we are using to analyze the effect on this, by the moment, will be only to make some phenotypic measurements. Okay, we will measure the anatomy of these cells. Our purpose is to go further, and if we check that this is working, to perform some RNA-seq, expressional patterns, what genes are expressing there, how are the changes in the metabolic pathways, and so on. We can do that also, but before we need to check that there is some effect that is phenotypically observable, and that we can have some evidence of that, and that we can run the experiment for a long time, okay, for like a year or so. Okay, these graphics here are showing, this is before choosing or before installing our experiment. We collect some good pieces from a vertical growing cypress and an horizontal branch. So we wanted to see if there was some modification in these anatomical parameters, and we detected that those branches growing horizontally had longer tracheids. These are the cells that form the wood of the cypress, and more interestingly, the thickness of the cell wall was also bigger. So what we think is that probably these two parameters are good parameters to analyze once we have the experiment completed. Okay, so Sorry. Me pide una... Quiero ejecutar el vídeo. Sorry, we have technical problems.
Típico de Windows. Un pointer que no hayas visto.
Bueno, o ponme el vídeo directamente que ya acabo. ¿Hay un vídeo por ahí? Sí. Este. Okay, so we install our clinostat for the preliminary analysis on a growth chamber. Okay, this was an inner growth chamber, very similar to the growth chambers that people use to produce cannabis at home. But the reasons for that is because we used some LED lights. This is important, the light frequency we used. It's a very short video, sorry. So the point is that we install the lights in the upper side. We can modify the spectrum of light of the blue and red light we are using to get the better or the best spectrum. And this, as you can see, it reflects the light. So we were trying to discount the effect of a potential phototropism, and we think that with this type of growth chamber, we can get it. Okay, so those growth chambers also allow to control the conditions, to have them in a constant temperature, humidity, and so on. So this is the point of our experiment right now, and we have interrupted it to carry our clinostat here and present it to you. We will now, Sergio will put it functioning, and I think that you can come closer to see how it works, and Sergio will explain to you the technical specificities of the clinostat. So if it's okay, Jose, I think we can. Yeah.
Are there real plants in there? Are those actually growing?
Yep.
Yes. Well, let me start.
It's not plastic. It's not plastic.
Is there a formula between the height, the altitude of the plants and the ground?
I don't know. Maybe it is.
I suppose if the gravity is lower,
You can come here to see.
Yeah, that's our hypothesis too. But we don't know. We actually don't know.
but the problem is the stability of the structure.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because if it produces less lignified cells, it won't be able to withstand all the heat.
Que se puede crear una planta enclenque que
Eso es lo que queremos ver.
I
Claro.
told you the requirements that the experiment needs. I made a solution based on 3 principal systems. The power systems is made with a 24 voltage bank, and then the other principal aspect that is really important for the cables to not get enrolled here is this. It's like in Spain we say that portascobillas, but they used commonly for scalestri.
Yes.
The same mechanism.
So you always have a contact,
Yes.
even if it's spinning.
Inside there are like thin pieces of metal that
It's like a dynamite.
yes. And well, then the power system gives the power here to these pieces of here. There is a back converter, and it keeps the power constant to 24 volts. That is what we need. Then I made a control system based here on Arduino Uno board, and then I added a module to control the stepper motors. And the code is very simple. Just I can control velocity and the direction of the motor, and that's one of the principal factors we needed. And then the mechanical system. Mechanical system is based on these motors that are high torque motors, NEMA 27, and on a very important planetary reductor. This multiplies the torque that the motor gives to avoid heating problems with the motor and electronics and reduce the current that the motor needs to function. And these are the accumulators, are the pieces that joins the motor with the axis of turning.
And the effective gravity is 1/3 of the Earth, not the effective gravity.
Here we are approaching that plants feel like more or less zero gravity compensated. I mean, not, it's like...
We are not altering the magnitude of gravity.
Yeah,
It's impossible to do it here. You need to throw it in a free fall.
Since you have an acceleration, so it will be a little bit affected, I suppose, on the positive. But like Formula One, that pilots,
Yes.
when they turn and things like that, but this will be something quite small. But how about the water?
Sorry?
The water inside, how do you water the plants?
Oh,
You mentioned that you open this.
Yeah, we take off
Do you
the...
have a homogeneous channel full of water? Or, because if you put the water in the center,
Yeah.
how does it distribute in all the soil?
We have proved that water more or less spread well inside the cylinder. And regarding that, we water through these holes that there.
And are you proposing a random or a homogeneous movement, or are you trying to compensate the vertical direction of normal gravity? Because I guess you kind of need some extra compensation for the normal direction, right, or not?
Not really. We have think in a random positioning machine.
Sorry, there are some people on YouTube that are following.
Wow.
We have a peak of followers.
Fans. Really, a random positioning machine will be very easily to produce. It's just changing the program that control the motors, and that will be easy. Yeah. Any question?
Is there any difference between the plants growing in the center and is there any difference between the plants growing in the center of the cylinder and the outer parts, or not, due to this radial velocity, or you haven't noticed?
Well, we have read a lot of studies, and at least there is no difference up to if you go under 3 RPM. If you go faster than 3 RPM, the effect of the acceleration starts to affect the plants. But under 3 RPM,
But with the larger Linus class, probably the effects could become more evident, but with this...
In this sites, they are practically the same.
So you keep this running 24 hours a day?
It's been turning for all a month uninterrupted. And
Not for today. So today the experiment is ruined.
well, no, because the wood doesn't grow down so faster on a day.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
So
A small interruption won't affect the experiment. Won't affect it because that mother cell that produces some time to differentiate and then to maturate.
And then to maturate, so it can produce a functional cell. This has to die, the cell has to die.
How long do you have to keep it to I mean, what is your intention?
Well,
How long
I didn't tell you. If you wonder what is this,
We wanted to
This
have
is
it, if we can have it a year,
Oh, okay, great.
so they are not very happy in our institution with the light consumption.
a way to balance the
So we are, maybe some of you can help us
kind of
in
travels,
in
mechanical
planning how
travel.
to install an a light panel or something to reduce the light consumption.
Actually, there was an idea to sign an agreement with some gyms to have people with a pedaling.
This is wasted energy otherwise.
Sergio, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I haven't explained this because it has many things, but if you wonder what is that and what's the function of that piece, it's a way to balance the edge of the clinostat.
The angular momenta are equilibrated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, your motor will suffer in some of the position, yeah.
for sure.
Tampoco he dicho nada tan importante.
You earlier showed that there are some possible malformation due to the alteration of perception of gravity. How do plant physiologists explain this malformation? ¿Cómo los fisiólogos de las plantas van a explicar esta malformación? ¿Cómo van a formarse? ¿Cómo ellos opinan que se forma?
Well, maybe Álvaro, which some of the malformation I showed have done by Álvaro, and they did an anatomical and transcriptomical analysis. So they detected some differentially expressed genes that might be involved in the production of this. Well, maybe you should explain.
Those pictures correspond to traumatic wood. We have performed a wound in the stem of the tree, and the traumatic xylem produced. We have detected that the mother cells, when I mentioned before, got an altered perception of the position, not only gravity, but also the position in the tree. Where is the outer part of the tree and where is the inner part of the tree? And when this is altered by a traumatism, by the wound, they lost this perception and the traumatic wound is completely disordered. So this is an anatomical pretty important point, because the shape of the cell is quite important for water transport, okay? And also the composition of the wood is also altered, of the cell wall. Transporting cells need to be lignified, need to be rigid in order to resist, to support this negative pressure in the inner part of the cell, so that water can move upwards, okay, like a syringe, okay. But in this traumatic wood, lignin is reduced, so they function in an altered way. They are not so efficient, okay. And if position is altered, position perception is altered, probably the shape of the cells will be different, and also the composition of the cell wall. And this cell wall is what we use in wood to produce the viscose. It's made of cellulose from the cell wall. Lignins are also used to produce biofuels and so on. So we think that gravity will be important for this development of the tissues.
Okay, so we will be asking you to occupy your seats because we are going to do the final remarks. But, I mean, keep it working so we can continue with the experiment. No, déjalo funcionar. Ahora, vamos a hacer el final remarks. Ya tenemos el final remarks. Si quieres dejar la transparencia esa que teníamos. Sí, pero no la cámara para que esté en la posición original. Vale, porque esto le tengo que mover. Es verdad, tienes toda la razón. Tenías ahí la marca. Okay, so this is it, but still we have two surprises under our sleeves. But actually these are just a few closing remarks, just to thank you so much for attending this travel to Mars, to all the people involved. First of all, of course, we have to thank Ayuntamiento San Lorenzo del Escorial for providing us many of the materials, the INTIME project. But personally, I would like to thank David Pacios Izquierdo, and of course, why not, Sara Ignacio. Because as you may know, it's impossible to organize something like this without a proper crew. But all of you were collaborating everything, so we're very grateful for that. So, this is it for now. I mean, we will be closing right now the streaming.